So what a wonderful thing. I'm going to talk tonight to Dr. Steven Greer. I've wanted to talk with him again for some time. He is the founder of the Disclosure Project, which is the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and the Orion Project in Serious Technology Advanced Research. Let me just tell you that I think this is a really apropos moment to talk to Dr. Steven Greer because of what on earth is going on in this country with the election, the health, the mental health, and the kind of exposure of how angry everybody is. I am in a way glad to talk on September 11th. Of course, we all remember where we were and what we were doing. But Dr. Steven Greer is the father of the disclosure movement, and he had a wonderful moment in May of 2001, a National Press Club event, which I watched, and so did over 1 billion people. And he was talking about the existence of extraterrestrial life forms visiting the planet potentially, and the reverse engineering of the energy and the propulsion systems of those crafts. Now, since I live in New Mexico, and of course everybody knows about Roswell, I've been interested in that for years and years too. So I can't wait to talk to Dr. Greer, which I hope he allows me to call him Stephen. He's been a lifetime member of Alpha Omega Alpha, which is the nation's most prestigious medical honor society, which I think is kind of interesting since we're talking about the different energies of the above and here. And he was, during his life and career, the chairman of the Department of Emergency Medicine at Caldwell Memorial Hospital in North Carolina. Some of you might have read his books. He's the author of 4 of them. And he talks about this. By the way, what's interesting to me really deeply is that he has studied Sanskrit and the Vedas extensively. And I spent a lot of time in India trying to understand whether there had really been extraterrestrial visitation and potentially a war in India thousands of years ago. Anyway, he's been seen and heard by millions worldwide on CBS, BBC, Joe Rogan, Discovery Channel, and now he'll be heard on my show. I am really privileged and honored to have you. Welcome, Dr. Steven M. Greer. May I call you Steven?
Sure, you can call me anything you'd like.
Don't say that. Don't give me that freedom.
No, it's really, I'm very happy to be on the show with you. I'm really looking forward to it.
Thank you. Now, this Disclosure Project, of course, I've been watching and stuff. Tell us how it's going and kind of what it is. And that'll start us off, and then I've got a bunch of stuff to ask you.
Well, really, we're in the whole new phase of it. We've just launched a campaign where essentially I concluded after we briefed the Clinton presidency and their CIA director back in the 90s that this is something that people are going to have to do. And I had never intended to get involved in this at this level. And, I have 4 children and had an emergency medicine career. And my real interest in this subject stems from experiences I had when I was a late teenager. I had a near-death experience and then became a Sanskrit scholar of the Vedas and then a meditation teacher. And I was really interested in the nexus of where consciousness and higher states of consciousness interface with interstellar communication and technology. And this became a really big focus of mine for over the last 40 years. But
Steven, wait a minute. Let me ask you, when you had your near-death experience, first of all, what caused that? And second, is that when you started to be interested in the Vedas?
Yes, I was raised a very devout atheist, and my family didn't believe in anything if it didn't exist in a test tube. And as you may know, my mother's brother was one of the guys who designed the lunar module that put the first man on the moon. His company was Northrop Grumman, and so what happened is I was being a stupid teenager guy, and I had an injury on my left leg and bicycled 200 miles in one day, and it spread that infection all through my system. Ooh. And I was raised very poor. We didn't have anything. We didn't have doctors, so I didn't go see a doctor. And I just got sicker and sicker and had a near-death experience, which I spontaneously healed from this injury. Never did go see a physician. That's another whole long story that's in my first, one of my books called Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge. But what happened is that I had an out-of-body experience. And for me, the experience was about the experience of the true nature of the conscious mind in its infinite form. So I went out into space and became sort of this infinite mind shining within the vessel of my individuality, or through the vessel of my individuality. And it was beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful. And from that, I became incredibly interested in what the nature of consciousness is and the mind, and these issues. And it led me into the study of the Vedas. And eventually I became a meditation teacher and went all over the world setting up meditation teachers. And this predates my medical career, in my late teens and early 20s. In my misspent youth, as I joke, although while most people were doing crazy things like that, I was, exploring consciousness. But it really was a great foundation for what I eventually did in medicine and understanding the human condition, but also with the extraterrestrial question of when you become an interstellar civilization, what is that reality? And you realize it's trans-dimensional. It's a conscious reality that the cosmos is awake, and their technologies interface with thought and consciousness. And this was led me to this concept of making contact with these civilizations using a number of technologies, lasers and other things, but primarily through the conscious field and higher states of consciousness. So that's really what got me started. Now, when I started that project, which is called the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind Initiative, or CE5 Initiative, we had these craft appear right over us in Florida. And people can go to our website, SeriousDisclosure.com, and see these. But what happened is that there were people, I didn't know all of them, who were embedded at that first event, who were from the intelligence community. And these were friendly people in the military and intelligence community.
Oh, really?
Yes, because this is a matter of really beyond top secret interest. So within a few months, I was being invited to briefings with the head of Army intelligence and what have you. And within about a year, I was asked to brief President Clinton's CIA director on this issue.
How old were you then?
I was mid-30s. I was in my mid-30s then.
Okay.
And it was a bit intimidating, to be honest with you. I mean, I'm a doctor in North Carolina and living kind of a normal life. I mean, I think normalcy is greatly overrated, frankly. But why pretend? But I was, to the extent one could, having had my background. But what was shocking to me is that I discovered that both the Clintons and their CIA director were being denied access. Yeah, no, his CIA director was R. James Woolsey. Podesta had been the chief of staff for them. And
but
then
he was very interested in this stuff, wasn't he?
Oh, he still is. And if you've been following the campaign with Hillary, he's the campaign chairman, and he and Hillary both have been speaking openly about UFO disclosure during the last year. But when I started this effort, it was really an accident of history, I guess is what I'm saying, is because I really never intended to get involved with this end of it. But I started doing kind of shuttle diplomacy up to the UN with Boutros Boutros-Ghali and into Washington, meeting with members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the Senate Intelligence Committee members, et cetera, and so on. And people were extremely interested. But what I discovered, and this gets us to what we're doing right now with this new project, is that these projects are so deep black that they're called unacknowledged special access projects. Now, that's the title. That's the title of the documentary we're doing right now. We're doing a documentary that's going to be so explosive, and I hope you can come as my guest to the premiere when we get it finished.
Oh, I'd love to, Steven. Oh, I'd love to. Absolutely.
And you'll certainly be in.
I'd like to be unacknowledged too.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'll come in as disguised as Mr. Magoo, but I'm just joking. But I think that this led to a series of discoveries on our part, not just my part, but my military advisors and people like that who began to come around this project for the Disclosure Project, and that is, there's almost two parallel worlds out there. There's the world that the president and the Congress normally deal with, terrorism and taxes and Medicare and what have you. And then there's the world of the UFO issue and extraterrestrial intelligence. And beginning in the 1950s, from the best we can reconstruct, on Eisenhower's watch, these operations went completely unacknowledged, meaning so black that they would not acknowledge their existence. So a special access project is, those are a dime a dozen. There's 900,000 people with top secret clearances and various special access projects.
Let me stop for a second, Stephen. Why did it go so far under? What was their reasoning?
Well, the reason for it is because once they realized what the technologies were behind these interstellar vehicles, such as the objects that went down in Roswell, and they did. There were 3 of them, actually, that crashed there, not one. And once those began to be studied and they figured out the energy and propulsion systems, they realized that we would, if that was known to the planet, that we would no longer need oil or gas or coal or public utility.
Got it. And there goes the global elite and the Illuminati and all the global rich people.
Exactly. You're talking about hundreds of trillions of dollars in assets. So not billions. No one cares about $1 billion anymore, unfortunately. It's trillions. So what I discovered, and this is what I've discussed with the Honorable Paul Hellyer, the former Minister of Defense of Canada, who is actually he's a macroeconomics guy. And he said he didn't understand the secrecy, and neither did the CIA director for Bill Clinton back in the 90s. And I said, look, these technologies are so advanced that it would completely replace all the sources of pollution. We would have, instead of 48% of the world's population literally not having a pot to pee in, we would have a completely transformed macroeconomic system that would lift all tides, except for the uber elite that want to keep the world as it is. So once this was recognized, they slammed the door on this so hard you can't even, it was breathtaking. And they betrayed Eisenhower. This is why Eisenhower made that famous speech, beware of the military-industrial complex. I mean, he wasn't anti-military. He was a 5-star general, for God's sakes.
Right.
So, but the technology part of this is the part of the story that has never been told. And this documentary we're doing, which right now is one of the top crowd-funded documentaries in history, called Unacknowledged, we're in post-production right now, has dozens of these top-secret whistleblowers, military whistleblowers, including one man who admits to the extent to which he, as a counterintelligence officer, carried bags of cash to people in the mainstream media to get them to cover this story up. So, no, we have amazing. In fact, I was just in New Mexico in July interviewing this lieutenant colonel. And so what you discover as you go through this narrative is that it's really not that hard to understand what the secrecy about. It's really about power and lots of it.
It's really basically about money.
And money. But money is really a symbol for power, you see. Because when you talk about money, for me, is can I put my kids through college? Money for these guys is a symbol for massive macroeconomic geopolitical power.
But let me insert a question here, Steve.
Sure.
When you look at, because I figured out quite some time ago that technology was the reason for the secrecy, because that would render ineffective the money and power of the global elite, whatever you want to call them.
Sure.
But what I'm wondering is there another off-world civilization who likes the idea of the money power symbology? Keeping
I see. That's a popular idea. I don't see any evidence for it. I think actually what's happening is that if you look from 1940s to now, their big concern is that we have become an existential threat to not only ourselves, but potentially to other star systems. Because
the universe.
well, it's not just hydrogen and bombs and atomic bombs, although that started the whole modern era of UFOs being seen. But they've been around for thousands. I think they've been around for millions of years, to be honest with you. I think there's civilization.
Is that why you got so interested in the Vedas? And did you actually speak Sanskrit?
Yes, I used to tutor people in Sanskrit, and and
so you had a relationship with that reality, probably in old Vedic terms in India, correct? Don't you think?
I do, yes. And this is actually how, in fact, I've just come from the desert. We were up in the center of Joshua Tree National Park doing a CE5 event where we had the most amazing contact events happen with this group of people that I was training. And I think that we have the ability to move past this sort of cul-de-sac we're stuck in. It's sort of like a little eddy going around in circles where we've been stuck for 100 years on our civilization using sort of 1800s, early 19th century and 20th century technologies where we first started burning things to turn turbines and what have you for energy and power. But the power elites don't really want us to get to that next level. I meet with people in Silicon Valley all the time, and they're so proud of all their technologies. But I go, you know what? Your iPhone is being charged off of a coal-fired power grid from the 1800s.
Sure.
So we have to begin to look at what our civilization is doing and how it's ended up in this situation. And what we're doing with this new documentary called Unacknowledged is to connect those dots for people. What's the connection between extraterrestrial intelligence, UFOs, and the history of this, and these secret technologies, and how is the secrecy kept in place, and what can we, the average person, do about it? Now, what I ended up concluding after, about 7 years of dealing with folks in Washington is, as you mentioned, the 2001 National Press Club event, a few months in May of 2001, just before 9/11. We put together a few dozen of these whistleblowers, and we put them forward. And actually, I met with so many people, like we have a mutual friend, Dennis Kucinich, and others who were really extremely interested in the issue. But nobody really wanted to hold open hearings on it because of the ridicule factor. They don't want to be made fun of.
Humiliation is their big weapon.
Yes, and this we found, I have a CIA document from 1953 where it speaks of engaging Disney Studios to make cartoons and make fun of the ET issues so that it would be ridiculed. And what you find is that there has been such manipulation of this subject in the mainstream media and also in Hollywood, I hate to say it.
No question. But every time I ask heads of studios, heads of the television networks, what the hell are you doing with this fear and the ETs destroying us and blah, blah, every one of them says, God, it makes so much money. So we're talking materialism here, basically, not so much power, unless they are believing that their and that come out of some of this fear-mongering makes them money. They just are stuck in materialism. That, to me, has become the new religion. And
yes, it is, but that doesn't explain all of it, Shirley. Think about the fact that Close Encounters of the Third Kind and the movie E.T. were some of the biggest grossing movies in history.
Well, they're scared of Steven because Steven can really hit them in the butt, and they're afraid of him. And so but then he goes and makes Cowboys and Aliens or some damn thing, and that's, you think, well, what are you trying to prove now?
Well, yes, but there's a big backstory to all of that, and the ones that are like the movies Independence Day, that is out of central script writing from the CIA. Those narratives which make their way into movies today, which are so fear mongering, have to do with what Werner von Braun, who invented the rocket for Adolf Hitler, warned us about. He said we're going to create a situation of the Cold War. Then there's going to be nations of concern. And then there's going to be global terrorism. Now, we came out with this testimony back before 9/11. And then after that, there'll be the threat from outer space. And he says it's all a lie. It's all completely a lie.
No,
And the
okay,
reason, and the reason is that, right now we're spending $1 trillion chasing around a handful of terrorists in the Middle East. To grow the military-industrial complex, you got to have a new boogeyman. And I think they're trying to create a boogeyman.
Well, of course they are, and it all came out of Project Paperclip, at which he was one of the heads. So,
correct.
With Project Paperclip's kind of futuristic idea of, okay, and the last thing you'll be afraid of after communism, after terrorism, after asteroids, now you've got ETs.
Right.
What is after ETs? And that's why I'm wondering, who were these Nazis? Who was Werner von Braun, actually? And who were, and how come they let Eisenhower out? What is it that was on their minds? To make a lot of money, or to take over this beautiful planet on some level of consciousness, Stephen?
Yeah, well, I think that it's both, but I think that you have to understand how I understand this, at least, of what I've learned from running in these circles for too many years, I'm afraid, is that there's a need to conglomerate power around central authority figures, and the ultimate one is Big Brother, the military industrial system, and they would like to, one of the narratives in the movie Independence Day was, when Will Smith said, "Let's go kick alien butt," and they showed people from all over the world, from Arabia. Yeah, let's get into this fight. There's this sort of jingoistic and childish mentality of uniting people, not around something beautiful, that we're not alone in the universe, that we can evolve through higher states of consciousness, that we can become interstellar, but around some sort of Manichaean worldview, and that there's some threat out there, but that also through fear, whether it's through conventional Orthodox religion or government systems, fear controls the masses. So
that's the point. That's my question. Is this kind of off-world manipulation so exquisitely of the natural accommodation to fear? I
doubt it's off-world. I think it's the nature of frankly, I think it's just one of the foibles of human nature. I don't think there's anything off-world about it. First of all, if there was a threat from off-world that wanted to do this, it would have been done a very long time ago. But I think what's more likely is the demagogues who have existed in every generation have figured out how to use this subject for demagoguery and for fear-mongering and the acquisition of, as Eisenhower said, unwarranted power. And that, I think, is something we, the people, have to resist and understand. And the only way to do that is to awaken to it and to acknowledge it. So we want to take unacknowledged and make it acknowledged. So that's the whole point. The first step is, as in the Vedas, it says, knowledge is the greatest purifier. If we can bring the information out and show people a path to how we can deal with this and empower ourselves to take this matter into the hands of the people, to make contact, to bring out the sciences and technologies. I mean, why do we go along with the secrecy that we're using oil in our engines still? We have the ability to put teams together. I mean, this is ridiculous. And we need people to be coming together to develop these sciences and technologies independent of large corporations and the government. That's a big part of what I've been calling for. But
let me interfere once more here.
Sure.
And I think what I'm going to basically bring up is religion is a huge reason for this. Because if the technologies of these other star nations are not anything separate from consciousness, even, if the technology is literally the speed of consciousness and they have learned how to manipulate their own tie to the complete enlightenment of themselves, then what is the church going to do about that?
Well, they're going to have to grow up. And although, I had a great conversation at the Vatican about this, and with Monsignor Balducci, who is a senior advisor to the Pope, and his view on this was actually quite enlightened and understands. Now, the problem with all of this happening, I had a man at the Jet Propulsion Labs I was meeting with who had imaged some of the really old structures on Mars. Buzz Aldrin has called for going back to Mars and examining the obelisks and other things that are there, and they are there. And this man said, I said, well, why don't you at least disclose those? Because those are ancient. He says, because it would collapse the orthodox fundamentalist belief systems of every religion in the world. And I said, well, good. And he said, no, you don't understand what kind of power there is in that system. And this was a scientist telling me this, not a religious person. And when I had this
how did the Vedas, in the ancient Indian times of extraterrestrial violence, and you have to go along with that, right? I mean, that is really what so much of the Sanskrit has been translated to mean. The Mahabharata, etc. They are talking about off-world violence, right, Stephen?
Well, no. What they're talking about are how I interpret that is that there's nothing new under the sun. There have been ETs having contact with humans for a very long time. There have been other civilizations that have had contact and developed the technologies as we have done covertly, and then ended up weaponizing them. I think those were humans who did that. So I think there's
but how did the old Sanskrit texts who discuss these technologies in terms of how powerful they are violently, how did they come to terms with what they learned?
Well, I think eventually it ended up being, if humans use this kind of technology violently, it means that civilization eventually becomes extinct. And I think there have been civilizations on Earth that are human that have come and gone because they've made the same mistakes we're making now. And I think the big challenge right now is whether we're going to make the same mistakes over and over. Ben Rich, the head of the Lockheed Skunk Works, the super secret Skunk Works, said, we have the means to take ET home. And he admitted that we already had developed this level of technology, but because it's being handled non-transparently, covertly, by a lot of people who, quite frankly, are sociopaths, there is a risk of this. And I think this begins to become the central question is, do we come together as a people and say, yes, these technologies exist, and they've existed for a very long time. Do we put them to the use of enlightenment and free energy and a new civilization and a sustainable level one civilization, as Michikaku would say, or do we slip back into what happened where it talks about in the Mahabharata and the Vedas of some kind of weaponization of it that ends up being calamitous?
Right. That is our decision right now.
It's our choice. And I think the prime directive, I hate to sound like a Star Trek person, but the prime directive really is in play here. And there's a tendency for people to try to blame things from outside the planet or outside humanity, and I say no.
Instead of taking responsibility for it.
Bingo. And I think we have to take responsibility for our own consciousness, our own actions, and our own future, and manifest that future. And if we do not take responsibility for it, then there are these other kinds of folks who are going to step into the vacuum. So the sort of complacency and apathy of the masses is what has to change, because there's always going to be a power-hungry sociopaths, whether it be Hitler or Stalin or Dick Cheney or whoever it is, who are going to step into that vacuum. And I think we have to ask ourselves, well, why are we allowing that? And I always say to people, there's only one problem with nice people, is that they're nice. Nice people get overrun by these psychopaths. So we have to be, in this sense, Shambhala warriors, spirit warriors who stand up to these elements and speak with a clear voice and come together as a people. And I think then we can make this change. Every whether you're looking at the ancient Hopi tradition or what's in the Vedas or where have you, there is this sense that right now, the time we're living in right now is the time where we can either slip into destruction and sort of this eschatological end of the world nonsense, or we can actually create a whole new civilization. And this is our choice. This is our free will to do this. So it's an existential crisis, and I think it's not been dealt with well over the last. Well, I think the mistakes that were made, frankly, were before I was born. I was born in 1955, so by then the die was sort of set on the path we're on. But I think that everyone who's between the ages of senility and puberty is sort of have the responsibility now to make this change happen in a way that's towards enlightenment.
Now, what do you think of the decision that Oppenheimer made, who, as you know, was he was actually fluent in Sanskrit, etc. And he picked, being from New Mexico, I don't know why I'm living in a place of such ancient, technologically superior peace, Hopi, right. Many of the old Indian traditions. Why did he pick New Mexico? Okay, not because the trees were there and he went to school. No. And when I finally realized that he picked Los Alamos for the weapon of mass destruction was because the energy here in New Mexico is containment energy. So he had to go ahead and do it at the behest of, I guess, all the politicians, and certainly Truman gave the okay, and all of the nuclear scientists who said, we've got to do this and stop the war. What do you think of his decision to go ahead and open up the atom in an environment through the energies of the old, let's say, Vedic traditions of higher consciousness, also visited mainly by off-world superior nations, still exists in New Mexico. That's why I'm here and why so many are. What do you think of his decision? Do the bomb, but make it contained.
Well, I think, of course, this is probably a story that's happened before where society has reached this point in technological development and has self-destructed. And if any, imagine what the technologies are, surely, to go interstellar, to go from one star system to another. They're much more sophisticated than the atomic bomb or the hydrogen bomb. And if this level of technology is weaponized, or let's put it another way, if the consciousness of conflict and destruction seizes upon that technology, then it is the end of that civilization. And that's why the choices that are being made are so critical at this time in history, because I believe we've entered in the whole, if you want to get into the Vedic concept, another whole yuga, a 500,000 year cycle. And
this is a Kali Yuga time, no question.
And it's the closing of one yuga and the opening of another. The next yuga, the next era, is the time of global enlightenment, interstellar travel, an unbroken level of peace, not only on Earth, but elsewhere. It's universal peace, not just world peace. And so we're at this point of a bifurcation, a choice. And we have to get it right, because the last yuga, the Meta Yuga, the big one, was about 450,000 years, where there's been the hallmark of that era was a rising to a certain level of development and then falling, and rising and falling. Or there'd be an enlightened civilization such as the Shambhala kingdom, and then it would vanish. Now, the hallmark of this next yuga, is how I understand it, is that the entire globe of the Earth and humanity will reach to a point of global peace, but also interplanetary relations and peace. And that is the next big step. So you can't fight the last war. You have to look into the future. What does the future hold? And I think the future is actually quite beautiful if we can get these issues right this time. But it really is a spiritual and consciousness problem as much as it is, or more than a technological one. But at the same time, if we don't get the technology right and we stay on the path we are now, we're going to destroy the biosphere because of how stupidly we're living on it.
But Stephen, they're the same thing. The technology of the spirit is the fuel.
Yeah, well,
that's what
actually,
I have understood, and therefore it's not separate from consciousness.
No, it's not separate.
The consciousness, yeah. So that the technology of interspace travel is all in the heart and in the mind, not somewhere where you put it into a tube and shove it into your craft.
Well, there's both the consciousness that goes with it that allows that to happen, but also there are sciences. There are very specific sciences that allow for what are called transdimensional physics. And I know guys who work in these laboratories where they do this stuff.
But they're still relying on it being separate from the potential of their own consciousness. The
yes, and this is the big problem. The people playing around with this kind of fire don't have the requisite level of consciousness to be doing it properly. And this is where you have the wrong consciousness seizing upon a technological capability, and that's where it can go sideways. So
no, I disagree with that statement. I don't think there is a separation. The psychological, the consciousness attitudes separate from the technology. No, to me, they're the same. So when you realize, my God, we're talking about ourselves, not technology,
right?
That you are the technology. We are the fuel, period. Once you get that clear in your head, the scientists, they've got to come out of this closet, too, of not understanding that their transdimensional technologies are in their own hearts and their own minds.
Right. Oh, yes. Well, that's totally true. But I'm talking about from the level of consciousness where they're operating. From the level of consciousness of what you're discussing, all of this is that. And that the conscious mind, basically everything is consciousness. But when you begin to differentiate it into different spheres of relativity, and you get into what I call increasing levels of non-locality. Everyone thinks it's either pure consciousness that's unbounded or very fixed relativity. And in reality, there are degrees of that. And once the understanding happens that all of this is that, and that if our true selves is this expanse, and that it becomes the operating system, you're not going to even want to have the idea to harm other people and other worlds.
Right.
So
let me ask you something in relation to all of your studies of contact, perhaps, or whatever. Do you think there is no conflict, there is no polarity going on between other star nations themselves, never mind Earth?
Well, I think that if there was a conflict, it would have been resolved instantly.
Why? Why don't we know anything about it?
Here's the problem, and I know I'm talking now with a science hat on. I know people love to get into these sort of battles and what have you, but I don't view it that way. The way I view it is that if a civilization has reached our level of development and hasn't chosen this state of universality of peace and universality of consciousness, they're going to self-destruct, just like we're about to. And so it's I call it the imperative of consciousness in interstellar civilizations. In other words, to become interstellar, you have to, at the minimum, have become a level 1 civilization, or you implode on yourself.
Well, now, I don't know about that. I don't know.
Well, you can't prove a negative. All I'm saying is that if there were civilizations out there who really wanted to close out this deal, it would have been done in 1945. Because
I don't know that Earth has that much to do with it.
I mean, look, the level of consciousness and technologies that would attend interstellar transdimensional travel and teleportation, if it was attached to a conflict, that it would last a nanosecond before it's all over.
No, but wait a minute. How do you wouldn't have to necessarily have conflict, although tell me how that's possible, between the point of views, and this is what I'm beginning to understand. It's not the polarity of good and evil, good and bad, light and dark, or any of that. Suppose the polarity is the consciousness of collectivization of the spirit as opposed to the individualization of the spirit. And those are the two polarities. Now, that's a different kind of war.
Well, actually, I think that is, again, this gets into a duality discussion that I think is transcended by the knowledge and wisdom of civilizations that are interstellar. Because you have this, where our planet will be heading is, on the one hand, we'll be increasingly united and interconnected to each other. You could call that collective. But at the same time, the individual will be enormously empowered, and the local level will be empowered. And I think these twinfold processes, which are viewed as at odds to each other, are actually, it's a paradox. They actually occur at the same time.
Well, not really. I mean, look at what happened with, and a lot of some of the off-world contacts that I have had have really used China and the United States as examples. That with the Long March and the Chinese experiment with human civilization being everyone will be collective, as opposed to ours, which is individualization reigns. We will all get along even though we think and feel and our consciousness is individualized. All of these, both of these were trumped by materialism.
Right. Sure. Absolutely.
But we still don't have then, we don't, or do we? Maybe you know, if there is a civilization that has successfully solved the problem of collectivized consciousness.
Yes, I think the civilizations that have gone interstellar have done so, although it's expressed in different ways. And I think that's the challenge that humans have, where we live together, and we realize the singularity of consciousness that emanates within each of us, and where there's still the beauty of the expression of the individual. I honestly don't think those are opposed to each other. I think where it begins to be a problem is when it's imposed externally on a political system, and that's
what we have right now.
And so the external imposition of these things is a huge problem. Because you really can't impose something like this. This is something that has to be like the lotus that unfolds.
Well, I don't know. Tell me where you think we are, since we're supposed to be the leader of the individuated world and everybody gets their own vote. Where are we here? What are we doing in this culture? I mean, please, are we going to make it or what?
I think that it's a chapter that hasn't been written. I think it's a choice.
Well, of course not.
And I think,
but what is
my own view is that we will, but there's the school of hard knocks here. And there's a wonderful Chinese expression: unless we change directions, we're likely to end up where we're going. And and
I love it.
So where we're going and where we're heading is towards more and more separation and destruction. And the worst of that would be for the leadership. And this is when I talk about the disclosure that serves the secret agenda. And that if the disclosure that happens is about an us versus them mindset, the whole what Werner von Braun said, look, on his deathbed, be careful of this because they're going to try to say there's an alien threat we should unite against. And Reagan at the United Nations even said, wouldn't our job of creating world unity be easier if we had a common alien threat? And I thought to myself when I heard that because I was old enough to hear it when it happened, why do we have to have a threat and hate someone else in order to be united? What is it in humans where we have to have someone to hate, someone other than us to hate in order to be united? This is a sickness. I think this is a true social illness and a mental illness on an individual level. And I think that this is where the solution is bringing in It's not stirring around the darkness, as it says in the Vedas. It's bringing in the spark of light of the concept of this ineffable oneness that all of life and all of humans have.
Sure, but sometimes the spark of light is what reveals the darkness is really there. It's
yes, and I think that's what's going on in this political climate now. Everyone is so fed up with everyone, and everyone knows that something is very wrong with the system, but the real issues aren't being talked about. You don't hear any of our political leaders talking about the fact that we have the solutions to the environmental and the poverty and all these economic problems, but there are these global elites who are holding the solution back from us. And that, in a way, even that is the wrong way to look at it. The question is, why have we, the people, allowed it to happen? And why don't we, the people, come together and change the direction? And that is exactly what the Disclosure Project and also the CE5 initiative, when I learned that there were no overt diplomatic efforts going on anywhere at the United Nations or in any foreign ministry or State Department to make peaceful contact and have a dialogue with these civilizations.
Amazing.
That's when I founded the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind Initiative. And said, it's sort of like when the Physicians for Social Responsibility went over to the Soviet Union during the darkest days of the Cold War. And so I said, why don't we, the people, do this? Why don't we understand the nature of our own consciousness? We're here. There are civilizations out there, and let's develop the ability to make contact. That was actually the original project I was involved with that then led to the Disclosure Project, because when we first started doing this, we had the ET craft and beings show up, and the intelligence community went ballistic. They went, well, actually, I'll tell you exactly what the head of Army Intelligence said to me. He said, "What the hell do you think you're doing, and who the hell do you think you are?" And he was very threatening, frankly. I told him to just basically, well, I shouldn't say it on the air. I said, "Buzz off, buddy." Anyway, I've dealt with gangbangers in the ER. You're not going to intimidate me. But
so then we're talking about the global elite money is actually calling the shots on the military?
Yes. So here's the sad part of I have met with so many generals and admirals who, if they're, I call them the white hats, the good guys who are at the Pentagon or the CIA, and they exist, who are victims of these other characters who are running these unacknowledged special access projects. I mean, imagine me sitting with an admiral. This is a true story, Shirley. I'm sitting with an admiral at the Pentagon who's in charge of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So he's J2. It's called J2. And I go in there, prior to the briefing, it's a stand-up briefing at the Pentagon, I give him a document from Nellis Air Force Base, Area 51, that has the project code names and code numbers of these unacknowledged special access projects, USAPs. And before I got to the meeting, he had tried to contact one. And Admiral Wilson, when he contacted this compartmented operation, they said, "Well, sir, you don't have a need to know." And he says, "God damn it, how can I not have a need to know? I'm the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff." And they said, "Sir, we cannot discuss this with you." And they hung up on him. So by the time I got to the Pentagon, he was so upset. He was so afraid, not at me, but of this situation. So you have people who are trying to do the right thing, but who understand that there's this dark and subterranean program that evolved or devolved in the 40s and 50s. And this is when the whole thing went off the rails. Eisenhower actually wanted to not go in this direction, make open contact with the ETs, and not do the secrecy. So did John F. Kennedy. But these maniacs and warmongers and misanthropic money whores ran amok of it. So I think this is, there's a 50 or 60 year history here that the public has no idea of what has happened, and that's what's in this documentary, Unacknowledged, which I hope people will look at. I hope they'll support it. They can go to fundraising.seriousdisclosure.com and contribute. Right now, we have about 3,500 people who've contributed, and we're in the final stretch of this. But we're also, for anyone listening, we're making a call for people to be whistleblowers. If there are other people who want to come forward beyond the ones we already have, they should contact me immediately because we're in post-production. We've already
But
filmed.
you know, and good for you, Stephen. Fantastic. Just the word whistleblower definition is humiliation. I mean, think of another word, which is not.
Well, it's people who are telling the truth. It's the truth.
Yeah,
it's a cosmic truth commission. We need people to be in the
good.
Okay, here's a cosmic truth commission, just like there happened after Rwanda and in South Africa with apartheid and the racism. There needs to be a cosmic truth commission where people come forward and tell the truth. And the problem is, I have interviewed about about 750 or so of these sort of men and women who have been in these projects. We have 120 or so of them on videotape. The ones that have contacted me lately are so intimidated because in these unacknowledged special access projects, it's made very clear, we're going to take your pension, but if you talk too much, we're going to kill you. Now, there's a member of my team who was, he's a naval commander, who was in one of these unacknowledged special access projects, and they were taken to an underground facility not far from you. And we're basically told, look, you talk about this, and there's a bullet with your name on it. It's going to find you. Right. So a lot of times these people are so intimidated. And this is where...
Listen, Steve, all they have to do is use me as an example. Just keep on talking. My big, big cloak of protection is they think I'm a nut. Just go ahead, be a nut.
Well, yes, and the media is complicit in that portrayal. But remember, this one of the great interviews we got for this new film is an Air Force counterintelligence officer who says, "Oh yes, I used to carry bags of cash to people in the mainstream media to get them to do that." So this is how the system works. Anyone listening, if you think you have a free and impartial media, or if Hollywood is free and impartial, it's so mobbed up with the intelligence community you can't even imagine.
No, well, here's another way I did it. I would call Johnny Carson's writers, or I would call David Letterman's another thing. He's a little off planet for me. But most of these guys have people who write stuff that would make like Shirley MacLaine jokes. So I would say to Johnny and them, let me help you write the jokes. So I was part of the comedy element of it all. And that's how you end up endearing yourself to the public, as long as it's funny. If it's not funny, you're sunk. So fix it so it's funny, and then it works.
Yeah, it's worked to a point where we'll take it. At least Jimmy Kimmel always asked whatever president or presidential candidate asks them about this. He asked Obama, he asked Clinton recently, and to John Podesta's credit, when he left the Obama White House last fall about this time, he tweeted out that his biggest regret being in government.
I know, absolutely.
Yeah, and he got involved with all of this after we did the Disclosure Project. But I think that what we have to understand, it's sort of an emperor has no clothes. Everyone assumes that you're the president of the United States, you have an all-access pass. Well, that's just a fantasy.
No, I know. Jimmy Carter told me. So did Bill. I asked all these people, and they tell me I'm only in for 4 years. I don't have a need-to-know basis here. So he said, I'll call you if I want to know something.
That's right. Well, actually, Jimmy Carter, had a UFO sighting, ran on a platform of disclosing the information back in the 70s. And then he gets into office, and old man Bush is the CIA director, that's the outgoing. And this is actually going to be in this new film. And we have a guy who saw the archives and was involved with this. And Carter wanted Bush Sr. to tell him, and Bush Sr. said, I'm not going to tell you anything. Go see if you can get it from the Congressional Research Service, and blew him off. And this is the incoming president of the United States. And I have a friend who was at a dinner party with Carter not all that many years ago, where someone said, what was it like being the most powerful man in the world? And Carter said, well, I wasn't that man. There were things I wanted to know about that they wouldn't tell me anything. And someone in the audience sort of giggling said, oh, what, things like UFOs? And President Carter said, yes, that and more. So, that is the truth, and people listening need to understand that our political leaders, and this, of course, is a big problem, because we pretend we're in a democracy where there's a system and checks and balances in place. What I'm telling people is that it is to a point, but on this issue and ones related to it, such as the technology issue, that system broke down in the 50s, and we've got to fix it. And it's our responsibility.
Stephen, I know, but the real tool here, just remember, just from my experience, we are in show business. We just are, all of life, particularly you guys now. So that if you understand that all of the application of the things you fear most in show business, which is they won't like it, you'll be humiliated, they'll laugh you off the stage, they'll never invite you back, blah, blah, blah. That's what we're suffering from. If you just go ahead with your new truth, as you're discussing now, it might be an entirely, first of all, you'll have a different way of bringing it up. There won't be fear there. We're in a world where we express an admiration for individual experience. Here's mine. Now, in relation to this, tell me what experiences did you have at that week in Joshua Tree? What happened there?
Well, we had some beautiful experiences. It's based on the concept that we go into we use meditation, and then we go into a state where we remote view deep space and make contact with these civilizations. And we had we had these two things that looked like stars that appeared. And they moved over, and we had a guy take an infrared picture, and it's this entire, like a giant extraterrestrial space station that's in the photograph. And while we're doing this, we have these electronic systems like laser and radar detectors and magnetic field meters. The ETs began to talk through them. I mean, we're out in the middle of an 800,000 acre witness. I'd love for you to come on one of these. It would just blow your mind. And they began to talk, and then we have an object light up in the desert about 10 feet from us outside. It just lights up almost like a trans-dimensional. If you didn't know better, you'd say it was an angel, but it wasn't. It was an interstellar craft with these beams that are shimmering in it.
How do we know the difference?
Oh, well, there is. As Monsignor Balducci said, angels don't need spacecraft, but they don't need a spacecraft. But
probably need to do the. How about maybe the occupants of the spacecraft don't need the spacecraft either? But we wouldn't believe it if they weren't in it.
Well, and there are civilizations that are at that level of cosmic consciousness, and it's an amazing experience when it happens. And what we have now, we actually have an app where people can connect to other people to form these groups and go out under the stars. And it isn't just the sky watch; it's actually to go into a meditative state, remote view deep space, and make contact. Now, some people say, "Aren't you afraid?" I said, "Afraid of what?" I said, "Although every time we've had a major close encounter happen, jets have come in or military guys have come in to try because they try to disrupt it." No, it's ridiculous. You wouldn't believe this is like some kind of it's like living in a movie to be on one of these week expeditions. It really is like living in a movie.
It's all show business, but how do these jets know that you've drawn these other phenomenon in?
Well, the NRO satellites, the National Reconnaissance Office satellites, have what are called neutrino light detectors. And so when an ET object steps down out of the near astral and let's call it transdimensional fields into 3D, it leaves a signature. And by 1974, they had developed neutrino light detectors that are on the satellites, and they pick it up instantly. Okay, so I know the man who developed this, by the way, whose technology was confiscated by the intelligence community to put on these satellites. So it's picked up instantly, and people are very naive. You know, people think that, oh well. I said, look, what Ben Rich said at the Lockheed Martin. He said there are no private conversations anywhere on Earth. Number one.
Anywhere.
And then forget about it. You can be on Mount Everest having a chat with no electronics, and they're going to hear everything you're saying if they want to hear it. So I said, but the technologies are really actually quite developed, and most people forget that by the 1950s. We had October 1954 is when the covert programs mastered gravity control. So we haven't needed surface roads or freeways since 1954. That is a fact. So the technologies are so well developed, and they can pick up an extraterrestrial vehicle once it begins to come out of the interdimensional, transdimensional fields into 3D. And even if it's not fully materialized, it may be there almost as a light energy. They'll pick that up instantly.
And as Stephen Hawking told me, how do we know those technologies haven't got a consciousness of their own?
Actually, the main thing that I came forward with in 1990 was a paper talking about consciousness-assisted technologies and technology-assisted consciousness, where there is a perfect interwoven nature of the consciousness and the technology. And this is actually a whole area of science and that I discuss and give. In fact, I'm going to be at Paula Harris's conference in Nevada at the end of, I think it's November 12th, actually, in Laughlin, Nevada. And this is going to be the focus of what I'll be speaking about, is where consciousness and technology and the extraterrestrial phenomenon all come together. And that
there you go. Absolutely.
It's the central focus of what I'll be discussing, because if you don't understand the nature of what's inside yourself, the nature of consciousness and mind, you're never going to understand the interstellar civilizations.
Exactly.
That's what I'll be discussing at there in Laughlin.
Laughlin, huh? Oh, that's the seat of a lot of these places. Okay. Why is it so funny? It's like the joke. The best and most intelligent thing that the devil ever did was to make people think he doesn't exist. Hello?
Yes. Well, and also, the truth is actually within everybody. And once you understand that the consciousness that we have, the singularity of consciousness at that level, that every dimension and every star system is folded within each person. We're a conscious quantum hologram. In other words,
but that is why I'm very interested in the Orion point of a collectivization. That's fascinating to me. And their home world got destroyed. So why are they doing this? By the way, do you have an answer for that?
Well, I think that there, as I said, there's nothing new under the sun. Not only have there been civilizations on Earth that haven't gotten this right, there are civilizations on other planets that haven't gotten this right.
And are in the midst of it.
And so, yes, but we're in a universal moment. So you can't judge the future by the past. The cycle we're entering, as I understand it, is not just an Earth cycle. It's a cosmic cycle. And so we instead of perseverating on the screw-ups of the past, we better start visualizing and apprehending and manifesting the good future of this next yuga. That's really what we need to focus on.
Okay, but how do you plan a future? You must look at the present. How do you evaluate and imagine a future where Donald Trump is the president? How do you do that?
Now we are getting it. Well, you know what? Who knows? Even a broken clock is right twice a day. So it could be that.
maybe he's the cosmic comic extraterrestrial. Maybe that is.
Yes, but at the same time, who knows? He may have he may just be enough of a wild card when he finds out that all this chicanery is going on, that he'll say, "Screw you! I'm not going to put up with it." So who knows? I don't, on the political level, I sort of am an agnostic, and I go, when it comes to policy and what have you, it's one issue. But when it comes to this subject, I found that it doesn't matter if you're left or right or whatever it is. These power elites are going to do circles around you, and I don't care if you are a billionaire. That doesn't mean anything to these uber power elites that are really running the show when it deals with these large transnational.
They're owned by their own money.
Oh, well, they print it, don't they? And so it's digits on a balance sheet, but on top of it, when you're dealing with the power of these large interlocking corporations that are international, and what was it? A mainstream Swiss organization concluded there were about 17 families and corporations that pretty much run everything. And so, I always say that it's masters and slaves, and guess what? We're all slaves on someone else's plantation. But
no, but the masters are slaves to their own stuff.
Exactly, and what we need to do is we need to realize that we're going to opt out of that system and just say, no, we're going to move on. But part of it is that actually the very comical part of this is that people are brainwashed into thinking they can't do anything about it, and realizing that you have within yourself the ability to do something about that is the first step to the enlightenment and the liberation.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
most people say, "Oh, what can I do? I'm a housewife in Poughkeepsie." Well, actually, you can do a lot.
Right.
You can do a lot. I mean, my joke is, I'm a country doctor from North Carolina.
Right.
I live in Virginia
now. House somewhere. Where from Virginia?
Well, near the University of Virginia. I have a farm near Thomas Jefferson's home.
Oh God, I love that. They're going to honor me at the UVA in around November 4th. I'm coming back.
Oh, well, let me know when you're coming, because I'm my home is right there.
Okay, I'll get your number from Britt, and maybe we really will get together and talk about this, and you can come and see them honor me.
I would love that. I would love it. And if you have time, you can come out to my farm in Virginia, and we can have a drink and look at sunset and talk about all of this.
God, and just go to Jeffersonian material, anything to get back to him.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, if you read Thomas Jefferson's material, he warned of the unchecked power of the corporations overrunning democracy. I mean, Jefferson was, a bit of apparently he was a pothead, but on top of it, he was one of the.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was, but he was something of a real visionary. Sort of, he was very prescient about the time we're in now, where the corrupting influence of these sort of transnational corporate interests would overtake what they wanted to put in
the new
our
experiment.
The experiment, the democracy experiment. Yes. Yeah.
Right, and Ben Franklin and all those, John Adams, whom I'm related to apparently, they all believed in the plurality of worlds. And
absolutely,
and discussions about that.
Yep, absolutely, and they had a deep understanding of almost at a metaphysical level of this. And,
yeah, we should dig out some of that material in some of Ben Franklin's letters about the beliefs and the discussions they had as they were forming this new republic, and expose that this is the reason why we are Americans, or trying to be, because of this exposure to the understanding that we're not alone.
Well, I know, yeah, we should. And it was funny, I had a knockdown drag out with this nut job who was telling me that, well, there is no separation of church and state in America. This is some, fundamentalist Bible thumper. And I said, excuse me, my family were literally the first losers to be prisoner of war with the British, trying to escape from people like you. And the person was so shocked. I said, you have no idea what America's foundation is. And I'm not shy about expressing my opinion, but
see how it's all show business, Steven. It's all about what an entertainment is this. It's like some dumb, stupid, late night show that we're doing all day long.
Well, yes, it is on one level. On another level, it's all very. It's all very serious and inspiring, and I'm confident that we can go forward and sort of renew globally the promise of a civilization that I think we began to have a glimmer of a couple hundred years ago.
Oh God, I hope you're right. Oh boy, thank you. I'm going to call you. I'm going to get your number and bother you.
Great.
Thanks, Steven.
We'd have a great time. Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you, and really would like to tell you that if you're able to be at the premiere, we don't have a date set, but we'll be sure to get an invitation to you.
Oh, are you kidding? To Unacknowledged? Of course I'll be there.
Awesome.
Will it be on this planet, do you think?
You're right.
Okay.
That's exciting.
Thank you, Steven.